We're at the 2018 Ripcord Association reunion. We're talking now with Paul Hansmann of Coon Rapids, Minnesota. And Laura is the wife of Paul Hansmann, who we've interviewed previously and who served in the Ripcord campaign. And she is going to give her side of the story. Okay, so Laura, begin with a little bit of background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born January 23rd, 1947 in Eldora, Iowa. I grew up on an Iowa farm.
Okay.
Worked hard. My dad was a good farmer, hard worker. Had two sisters and a brother.
Okay. And did your father have any other occupation beyond farming, or was he able to support himself entirely off of the farm?
He supported us with farming. However, he really was involved in a lot of organizations in the county.
Mm-hmm.
And so he ran for state representative in 1970, I think, and he lost. But then he ran for state senator, and he was an Iowa state senator for 22 years.
Okay. All right. And then what part of Iowa?
Central Iowa, north central.
Okay.
Steamboat Rock, little town, out on the farm. In fact, we still have the family farm. It's probably 80 miles north of Des Moines.
All right. And then did you finish high school?
Yes.
Okay. When did you graduate from high school?
1965.
Okay. And what did you do after you got out of high school?
Well, my grandmother was quite a lady, and she said that she would pay tuition for the first year of college if we went to a Christian college.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my father decided to enter me into a speech contest where I had to write a speech and present it, and I won the national, so I got my scholarship from that for 1 year, and then my grandma, of course, picked up the next year. So I went to Cedarville College. It's now a university in Cedarville, Ohio.
Okay.
And graduated from there in 1969.
All right. Now, where did you meet your husband?
In college. We were both in college choir, and they arranged us by height. He was the tallest guy, and my roommate and I were the tallest girls, so we stood on each side of him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I met him.
All right. And of course, he's in college, and of course, the Vietnam War at that point is going on. And so, are you thinking about? I mean, if you're getting serious and so forth, and maybe you're going to get married, and there's a prospect there of him being drafted.
You know, it's interesting. We were sheltered at the college about what went on in the world, and we didn't even think of Vietnam. It just wasn't. In fact, Paul and I just discussed this recently. He left school, and I stayed there.
Mm-hmm.
We got married in 1968.
Okay.
So, of course, if weren't in school, then you were eligible for the draft, and it caught him.
Okay. Now, I'm sure we have it in his interview, but just for the audience here, did he leave school just because he was tired of it, or he wanted to do something else?
Yeah, he wanted to do something else, and wanted to get married, so he needed to support us. So we got married, and then in '68 of June, and then I didn't go back to school the first quarter, my senior year.
Okay.
And then he got a draft notice. So in February of 1969, he left to go to, and so I was in school then to finish my college degree.
All right. How did your family feel about all of this stuff?
You know, I don't remember. We were not living near them at
Right.
the time because we were in Ohio, and his family was in Illinois and mine in Iowa. But it was just what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. And where did you actually have the wedding?
In Iowa,
Okay,
in my home church in
Okay.
Eldora.
All right. So he was an acceptable choice.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
think so.
Well, he's going to the right school.
Too bad, he was.
Okay.
Yes.
So, yeah. And then what kind of work was he doing?
Well, he was, at that time, his father was a superintendent of a bakery, commercial bakery, so he helped in the bakery. And when we were in Ohio, then he got a job in the bakery, just driving the bread truck, getting up super early in the morning and working while I was at school.
All right. And then, so you were still basically in Cedarville at that point?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
close by.
And then, would you watch TV news and things like that?
You know, not a whole lot. like I said, we were pretty sheltered. We were busy.
Mm-hmm.
I was in school, he was working, and, yeah, we knew about Vietnam, but it just wasn't something that we thought a lot about. We were pretty naive.
Okay, and so now, was there any kind of anti-war movement at Cedarville, or was that foreign?
No, that wasn't allowed, and we wouldn't have done that anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so now beginning of '69, he heads off to training, and then at that point, while he's still in the States and in training, how much did you see or hear from him?
Well, when he was in basic and then the AIT, I didn't see
Okay.
him. But then he went to NCO school.
Mhm.
So in Fort Benning, I went to Fort Benning, and then he went on to Fort Polk, and I was with him there. In fact, a buddy of his who got drafted at the same time, his wife and I both went to Benning, and because they went through all the training together in the States.
Mm-hmm.
So we went there and lived off base, and we got to see him on the weekends.
Okay, so you're going down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and this is now middle of 1969?
Yes.
At that point, okay. Describe a little bit what life there was like.
Well, I got a job as a babysitter. We lived in a mobile home, a small mobile home, and Shar and I lived together. And the guys, of course, were on base. We could go on base on Wednesday nights and see them, and then they actually got the weekends off every
Mhm.
weekend. So it was nice to be there, but it was lonely because we didn't know anybody, of course.
All right. Now, did you notice kind of a different situation as far as race relations or things like that from where you had been? I mean, did you notice? I mean, the South wasn't officially segregated at that point, but did anything seem different, or did that not register with you?
That didn't register. You know, I grew up in rural Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't accustomed to other races,
Right.
I mean, it's not that I had any problem with them, I just hadn't grown up around other races.
Yeah. So, but then, I guess the question then, did you see how black and white people in the civilian world related to
Yes.
each other?
Yes.
And did that seem different from what you were used
Yeah,
to?
it was different, but it didn't affect me, I guess.
Mhm. Okay. So now you go from there and to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and what
That was a culture shock,
Mhm.
because Fort Polk is nothing like Fort Benning. I always said Fort Polk was kind of the armpit of the United States.
Mhm.
We lived in a 10 by 50 trailer, the four of us.
Okay.
Yeah, the four of us did. And cockroaches, and it just was nasty. And we'd get up early in the morning and fix breakfast for the guys before they went on base, which about 4 o'clock in the morning. And we'd open the cupboard door, and the roaches would run. And so it was not nice. And when we moved from Benning to Polk, we had to pawn some things because we didn't have any money.
Mhm.
So that was rough too. Guys could
Yeah.
eat on base, but Shar and I had to scrounge.
Okay. And were you able to get jobs in Louisiana?
We didn't in Louisiana.
Okay. And then how long were you there?
Well, it was his OJT, so it was probably 8 weeks, maybe.
So he basically did one cycle of
Yes.
the training
Yes.
as a very, very new sergeant. Yeah.
And it was during that time that I got pregnant.
Okay.
And we discussed it. Paul was not in favor of it. And at that point, I thought, well, you may be going somewhere and not coming back. So I wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So now, from that stint, does he get any leave time, or does he get sent straight to Vietnam?
We did get leave over Christmas.
Okay.
So we went back to Iowa and Illinois, where his
Mhm.
parents lived, and we kind of split the time there.
Okay.
So he had that time.
All right. So and then basically, do you go and stay with your parents? Or,
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, I lived with my parents while he was in Vietnam.
Okay. Now, what was it like to send him off to Vietnam?
It was horrible. I just remember we took him, I was in Iowa at the time, we took him to the airport, and when he took off, I just collapsed, because it was real.
Okay. And then once he left, how long did it take before you heard anything from him?
I have all his letters, I kept them all. He couldn't keep mine because of the humidity and
Yeah.
the rot in Vietnam, but, it was several weeks because, in country and they had to go through some training or whatever to adapt themselves to Vietnam. So it was a while before I heard from him because he went in January. So it was probably sometime in February that I heard from him first.
Okay. Now, once he left, did you pay more attention to the news or whatever you could learn about what was happening over there?
Yes. Yeah. Then all we had, because, we didn't have the communications like the soldiers do now. So all we had was the 6 o'clock news. And I glued myself to the TV every night to see what was going on. And of course, they showed battles. That's what they had, and the numbers of men that were killed, and so every time I'd watch it, I'd see, well, maybe I'll see Paul. Of course, I didn't, and I never would have because there were no cameras where he was. But it was hard, very hard.
All right. Now, you're back home in Iowa. I mean, did the people in the community know what your situation was, or?
Yeah, it was a small community, and of course they knew he was gone and that I was there, and but people didn't understand, and I think this was probably countrywide. There were the protests going on, and we saw that on TV as well. But nobody said much. I was pregnant, and I can remember one experience. My dad and I sang together at a church function. And and I was very pregnant, and one of the men afterwards said something to my dad, and he says, how can a man go to a war and leave a pregnant wife at home and to live with her parents? I just don't understand that. How can that be? So he didn't understand what was going on, and there was, that was just kind of, I think, the whole attitude.
Okay. Now, how old do you think that man was?
He was probably around my dad's age.
Okay. So you
Yeah.
didn't remember the World War II stuff when
He
everybody
must
did
not
that?
have been in World War II. I don't know.
Yeah, but it was certainly a fairly common thing at that point in time. But okay, so he's just looking at this situation, kind of seeing it that way.
Yeah.
All right. Now, again, the small town Iowa, you weren't going to be confronting any direct anti-war anything.
No,
Okay.
no, there was none of that.
Okay. And did people ask after him, or did they just?
Yes, yeah, and especially I was involved in the church, and so yes, they wanted to know how he was and how were things going, and all I could tell them was from what the letters said.
Okay.
So.
And what kinds of things did he put in the letters? And how much?
Not a lot. He said very little. In fact, I just was going over them recently, and mostly it was, wouldn't it be nice if I could come home when the baby's born? Maybe something could happen, and I could come home. See if I can come home. But he wouldn't. He'd just say it's hot here or it's rainy, but he never really did say what he was doing, which was probably a good thing.
Yeah, and sort of one of the issues with letters and things like that, the government by and large didn't censor communication sent from Vietnam,
No.
but the men by and large censored themselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now, some people use cassette tapes or things like that. Did he ever do any of that?
No.
Okay.
And some of the guys that are here at the reunion, they took cameras and they had pictures. He was in the jungle, and he had a rucksack that weighed, I forget how many pounds, and he says, I just didn't want any more weight in my rucksack. So he didn't have a camera or a cassette recorder. He didn't carry anything except what he needed.
Right. Okay. And did you have any sense of where he was generally? I mean, was he allowed to tell you that, or
Yeah.
did you figure that out?
He did say he was in the Asha Valley, and that's pretty much, so then I'd get a map and see where is that. It was pretty far up north, near the DMZ,
And did he ever mention the Ripcord Fire Base or any of the other places?
He mentioned couple places. In fact, I was looking to see if he had mentioned ripcord, because that was, until he came back, that was unfamiliar to me.
Mm-hmm.
Camp Evans, because I know they were there for
Yeah.
a little bit, and then after he was wounded, he went to Cameron Bay
Mm-hmm.
to recoup. So those names were in the letters.
Right, yeah, and so that's, you just have, okay, so, when did you have the baby?
Had the baby, well, that's another story, because I was due July 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
Paul was wounded May 5th.
Okay,
A couple days after that, I went to town with my mom to mail him a 7-pound box of cookies so he could share it with his buddies.
mm-hmm.
And went to the post office, and then we went to the flower shop for some reason. I don't remember. It was a Western Union place too.
Mhm.
I didn't know it at the time, but they had gotten the telegram at the Western Union about Paul's being wounded, but she didn't say anything. And so we went home. My dad was in the kitchen. He's farming. Okay,
Mhm.
this is in May when he's out in the fields, which was unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And he met me in the kitchen and told me that the county sheriff had gone out to him in the field to tell him, small town,
Yeah.
tell him what had happened, and then Dad came and told me that Paul had been wounded. Then we got the telegram
Mm-hmm.
from the flower shop in town.
Okay.
So anyway, so that's the backstory.
So that's there, so that happens in May, and then,
Lance was born June 12th.
okay,
He was due July 3rd.
mm-hmm.
My doctor was a Vietnam vet. He said it was probably the trauma of learning all that, which caused Lance to come early.
Okay, but there's still a gap of several weeks between when
Yes.
you got the news. I don't know, did you then have problems with the pregnancy, or
No.
did this just something that just happened sooner
It
than it
just
should have?
happened sooner, yeah. I did get a letter from Paul, saying, well, I'm in the hospital, I'm okay.
Yeah.
So, that was good.
So how much of a lag time was there between the telegram and the letter?
It would have been at least a week and a half,
Okay.
I would say at least.
All right. Now, did the telegram say enough to give you an idea of what the situation was, or?
It just said that he had he was under fire, and I know that after the fact, he told me that it was at night, and they couldn't get them off where they were, the hill where they were. So he directed fire and continued to help his men, because he was a sergeant, so to help his men until they could get him in the next day. And he was wounded, so he got a commendation for that.
Okay, so how did you sort of deal with that in the meantime? What kind of stuff ran through your head?
I didn't know what to think. I knew he had been wounded. He told me he was going to be okay. So I took him at his word.
Yeah, I guess before you actually hear from him. That first week.
I was a mess. I didn't know what to think.
All right, so now, okay, so you've got at least some level of reassurance, okay, this is gonna be all right. How long was it before he came back?
Well, because Lance was born 3 weeks early, the first night my water broke gradually, so he had aspiratic pneumonia, and about didn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
So my doctor, of course, who was a Vietnam vet, said, we need to bring Paul home. So they called the Red Cross, and they contacted Paul out in the jungle, brought him in, and he didn't know anything. He was told that the baby was born dead and the wife was near death. And he didn't know anything different until he got stateside at Fort Lewis in Washington, and called home.
Okay.
And I was actually fine,
Mm-hmm.
and Lance was fine and went home the day that Paul got back into the States.
Okay, now, was this still just a temporary leave for him, or had he?
30 days,
Okay, so he got a 30-day leave at that point.
right.
All right.
Which was wonderful for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to see him, and he was so thin. He had lost so much weight. He's 6'4",
Mm-hmm.
and weighed about 160 pounds, so
Wow.
he was so thin.
Okay.
But he didn't talk about it much. He didn't talk about what he'd been doing. And at that point, in June, he'd been on ripcord.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay. Did you have a sense of how long he'd been in the hospital?
he said he was there for about a week and then
Mhm.
recovered for a week and they sent him back out.
Yeah. Okay. So now, so basically, he doesn't. Now, did he seem? I mean, aside from being thinner, did he seem at all different at that point?
Yeah, he was different because he was just a fun-loving, joke-telling guy, and he was just much more serious and much more quiet when he came home. Excited to see his son,
Mm-hmm.
but just he was different.
Then what was it like sending him back off again?
Yeah, that was hard. And you know, he's told me later, it was hard for him because he knew what he was going back to.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. I just knew he was leaving again. So it was tough.
Okay. And then once he goes back, then does he kind of start up writing again? So he picks up where he left off, or?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he would continue to write, but not say much.
Mm-hmm. All right. So then, how much longer did he have on his tour at that point?
Well, he asked for an early out to farm with my dad,
Mm-hmm.
so he was released the beginning of November.
Okay. All right. So he's kind of out of that, and now once he's back for good, did you kind of observe him having to readjust to civilian life, or?
Well, it's interesting because he had been gone. It was time for us to raise a family, and so let's just forget about it. Forget about Vietnam. You're done with that. Let's just move on. And that was my attitude, not realizing at the time, you know, a week before he'd been in the jungles of Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
No downtime, nothing. He just was out on a tractor on a farm in Iowa harvesting corn. And he told me later that there were times when he wanted to just get off the tractor, and we had a motorcycle. He wanted to get on that motorcycle and just run and just go and never come back. But he knew he had a family, so he couldn't do that. But he was different, and he was jumpy. I would wake up in the night and find him on the floor, sleeping. There would be times when I remember one night in particular, I was laying there and he'd kind of dozed off, and we'd had, it wasn't an argument, but a disagreement or something, and I wanted to remedy that, and I kind of poked him with my elbow. Never did I do that again, because he jumped out of bed screaming and ran out of the house and outside, and he was just shaking. You know, it's just those kinds of things started happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then did that stuff sort of get worse over time, or how did things work through that?
That kind of got better.
Okay.
You know, that, I mean, it took time,
Mm-hmm.
but I what happened was I learned what I could and couldn't do. It was interesting because just a few weeks ago I was talking to a really good friend of mine, and it dawned on me that my husband has had PTSD for 48 years.
Yeah.
Through the whole time. And, you know, I can go back and talk about some of the things that happened in our marriage, and I realized that it was as a result of Vietnam. It changed our whole family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it affected our children, it affected me. And he says that too. You know, he realizes it. It's the PTSD has changed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of melded into different things over the years. But
Yeah. Well, there are different components, and people have different combinations, and there is kind of that reflex action, which is really very direct, kind of standard PTSD. That's the kind of thing that sometimes will get treated with drugs. But then there's a lot of other things that you're carrying as well. There is sort of a moral injury, and
Right.
and there can be survivor guilt. There can be a lot of
Yes.
other kinds of things that go on in their head. It really is different from PTSD, and drugs make those things worse.
Yeah.
Now, did he ever get formally diagnosed with PTSD?
no.
Okay.
when he came back from Vietnam, he says, I want nothing to do with the military. Don't want anything. So he never did until we moved from Iowa to Illinois in 1999. And there was a clinic, and so he decided he'd go to that clinic. So that's when, actually there was a veterans office in our town in Illinois. So he went there and got his records all straightened out, and then he went to clinic. So then he started doctoring with the VA in Illinois. And then when we moved to Minnesota, they have a great VA system. So he's used them for sure.
Okay, but that's a very long time. Of course, it took a good long time for the government or anyone to really even recognize sort of what PTSD was.
Yeah, in fact, I looked that up because PTSD was not even a term until 1980.
Yeah, and it took some years after that before the kind of VA kind of got on board and decided to deal with it. So, yeah, so it's okay. So I guess to the extent that you can kind of describe sort of some of the effects of all of this on your family, or what you think was different because he had to deal with this.
I felt like I had to walk on eggshells a lot with him. There was a lot of anger. And just recently, Paul said that anger was his defense mechanism. And he's worked on alleviating anger, and now he's feeling a lot of emotion instead of the anger. So because he was that way, I mean, it's not that we had a bad family life, you know, but our son, who was born, of course, when he was in Vietnam, he and Paul would butt heads a lot, and I would have to be the mediator and say, okay, this is what he said, no, this is what you said, and this is, you're really saying the same thing. So I did a lot of that. Lance, I was his English teacher in high school, and I assigned a term paper, and Lance wanted to write about Vietnam. Well, he wanted to interview Paul.
Okay.
So I had to go to Paul and ask if it would be okay that Paul interviewed him, and because Paul never talked about Vietnam. It was just, he never talked about it. He would tell a few funny stories once in a while, but he never really discussed it. So I went to Paul, and he thought about it, and he said, okay, but it's got to be in one sitting, you know, just one time. So I sat in the living room while Lance interviewed Paul and talked about it. Well, it was in the evening, which was not real smart, because after that was all over, then Paul had nightmares and flashbacks and stuff that night. So, but Lance at least got the gist of some of the things, and Paul shared a few things with him about what he went through, but really not too much in depth. It wasn't until several years later, Paul and I were with a couple out in the woods. They had a campfire, and Paul started talking about it, and it was I was just in shock because he had never said anything about any of his experiences, and I always felt like that was kind of the watershed moment. You know, he just started, and people would ask him about it, but he wouldn't tell them a whole lot unless it was somebody he knew, and because he said, well, unless you've been there, you just don't understand. Which, and he started sharing more things with me too at the time. But there were things that I could and couldn't do. You know, he kind of wanted me around a lot, and so there were things I wouldn't get involved in because of that. I did, of course, get involved in things. I was a teacher, I taught, but it was hard. And, you know, I've heard people say that marriage is hard, but it's really hard with a Vietnam vet.
Yeah, and of course you get this sort of change to some extent in the person that you married, and they go away and they come back. In some ways they're somebody else, which is not a standard experience in a marriage where you don't have that kind of thing going on. So there's
Yeah, in 1 year, I said he aged 10 years in that 1 year. Now, I think that over time kind of leveled out, but yeah, he was not the fun-loving jokester. He didn't have that twinkle, he didn't have the laugh, he was very subdued, very serious.
So has some of that guy come back?
Yes, and that came back the first time he came to the Ripcord reunion. He had known, I didn't know about this, but he had known about the reunions and had never said much. I think he got the newsletter,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera. And Craig Van Hout, one of the guys that comes to the reunion, contacted him and said, Paul, you really need to
Mm-hmm.
go to these reunions. And so they had an Illinois gathering, just the guys from Illinois.
Mhm.
And I talked him into going because it was just probably 6 guys
Yeah.
and wives. So we went, we sat, we were going to a restaurant, and he sat there and he said, I don't know about this. I'm not sure. I said, yeah. Well, then Dale Lane
Mhm.
came and came up to the car. He recognized that this must be the guy.
Mhm.
And that was it. Then he talked to him, and it was really cool. And then Dale Cooper and Dale Lane and one other guy
Let's see.
would.
Merle de LaGrange, maybe? Or?
No,
Yeah.
it's Murphy.
Okay.
But
George. Let's see. That's
George,
yeah.
yes. Took me aside at different times and said, you need to get him to the Ripcord reunions.
Mhm.
And I said, I'll try my best. Well, then we did come that
So-
year in Indianapolis,
Okay. And so what year was that?
2011.
Okay. Yeah, the first year I went.
Was it? Yeah, same time, yep. And it was amazing to me because I sat at the tables and listened to these guys talk, and I said, they're talking the same language. Here he couldn't tell other people about what he'd been through or what was going on because nobody understood.
Mhm.
These guys did, and I think that probably helped him more than anything. And he found connections with these guys and in different battles that he'd
Mhm.
been in, skirmishes, that had support.
Mhm.
And so he was able to put some pieces together and timelines together.
Yeah, sort of getting control of what happened to you on
Yeah,
some
he
level.
said, I guess I wasn't imagining that. I guess it did happen.
Yeah, and that's something that affects a lot of trauma survivors of one kind or another, and we see a lot of that today in very different kinds of situations. But women who are victims of sexual assault or harassment or things like that, and then
Right.
once they realize that they're really not alone in this and it's not their fault, then that changes.
Mhm.
And for a lot of these guys, it works that way too. Of course, today we have a lot of new veterans, people who've come back
Right.
from Iraq and Afghanistan and so forth, and a lot of them are married or in relationships or things like that. Of course, now you have women who've served over in these places as well. I mean, do you have any kind of advice or encouragement to offer family members of people who've done that kind of thing?
I just expect it to be different and support the veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And talk to them, make them talk to you. I didn't do that for a long, long time. I just I buried it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was afraid to have him tell me, because, when I was teaching, I had him come to the classroom and talk about Vietnam. And I had coached the kids before he came, and I said, just be aware of the kind of questions you're asking. And if he doesn't want to answer it, he won't answer. Of course,
Mhm.
one of the kids says, did you kill anybody? That's the standard. And I
Mhm.
thought I had told them not to ask
Yeah.
that question. But there are questions you can ask, and I think for anyone dealing with a veteran, you just have to be careful about the questions you ask and let
Mhm.
them tell you what's going on in their heads, and little by little.
Okay. And then you mentioned coming to reunions and so forth, and you're listening to the veterans. Do you also find the wives have the same kind of experience as you did? Or?
Yes, although, I haven't found a lot of wives who were married to these veterans when they were in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Either their marriages failed, or they weren't married. They were
Right.
young,
Yeah.
So they weren't married.
Mm-hmm.
So there are just a few that I've talked to that had some of the same experiences that I have.
But I guess a lot of them would have had to learn to live with
Yes.
the after effects.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, we do talk about that. And they say, oh yeah, that's happened, or yeah, he's done this, and yes, oh yeah, same thing. So I think it's common.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else you'd like to add to the story here, other particular memories or impressions that you've got?
No, I think, like I said, our marriage was hard and has been hard. think that, you know, just being together and supporting each other, and our faith has been a lot of that. You know, I think if we hadn't had that, I don't know where he'd be, I'm not sure where I'd be, but it's, you just gotta keep going.
All right. Well, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to share this story. It's the kind of thing that a lot of people, it turns out, are interested in and often does not get recorded at all. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.